Okay, so I'm just going to give you a bunch of examples, show you a bunch of projects. Um, but first, what I'll do is just sort of briefly outline what sort of work in this field, contemporary ecological art, environmental art. There's many different sort of terms for it. Sort of what their kind of motivation is and what their their goals are. So as it says here, it's probably not that different from others who are interested in sustainability. So they try to they have these kind of creative deployments of ecological knowledge, technology. They try to create. They're very collaborative works. Typically, these works they're kind of platforms for conversation and raising awareness. Action often in public space. Knowledge sharing, again, sort of community-based, and they can sometimes be used to rediscover or reclaim lost or neglected landscapes and ecologies. And so artists have been employing ecological practices for a while. The sort of the first kind of eco-art movement was like in the 70s. And it sort of has a connection to conceptual art and systems art movements of the 60s and 70s. That they had this interest in forging sort of a new aesthetics and new systems of ideas by combining, again, an interdisciplinary collaboration, combining, again, sort of living systems, public engagement, et cetera. And the contemporary, what's called new media or digital media artists have sort of expanded upon this tradition. And one of the characteristics you'll probably see in these projects is they sort of eschew the sort of do not disturb approach to environmentalism. So they're actively engaged, sort of thoughtfully, I hope you'll agree, sort of engaging and manipulating the environment. And sometimes, so one of the papers that I assigned you guys, within the art world, sometimes it's contextualized as this idea of post-media. That doesn't mean there is no media. It means if you use every medium available to you, it's kind of like post-media, right? That's the kind of term that's used. And if there's time, we could talk about sort of theoretical frameworks and other methodologies that we can use to kind of analyze this work. But like I said, I'll mostly just be showing examples. So I don't have time for a full history, but I'll give you a couple of sort of early eco-art project examples. So this is Hans Haacke. This piece called Rhine Water Purification is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. This was a gallery near the Rhine River near the Krefeld sewage plant. And it was essentially polluting the river, so he set up a system that brought the water into the gallery. I don't know if you can see the tube there, sort of under the floor, and basically cleaned this little piece of the river, and those jugs and everything in the back is the old dirty water. So he essentially kind of closed the loop of water use and reuse, right? And this water, the cleaned water, remediated water, was actually used to water the museum grounds. I think they had a garden or something in there. Betty Beaumont, in late 70s, early 80s, she collaborated with scientists and engineers to basically take coal fly ash blocks, like concrete, and it's about 500 tons of it, so it's coal waste. So that's a pollutant, but it had undergone some kind of transformation. I'm not exactly sure how they sort of cleaned it, but they used it to create a reef, underwater reef. And this is actually listed as a fish haven by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. So that's again the fly ash. So it's recycled, reduces emissions, right? And it's like a big landmark under the ocean, right? Joseph Bouis was a kind of sort of landmark figure, I guess you could say, in the ecological art movement. So he, with the help of volunteers, he this piece, 7,000 Oaks, he planted 7,000 oak trees in Germany, in Kassel, Germany. And he did another version in New York City a couple years later. So it was, so he planted oak trees with an accompanying basalt stone to sort of commemorate it, or it was, to sort of mark it. And it was, 7,000 oak trees. It was a pretty big project, and it was controversial. Like the city government kind of, some parts of the city government were against it. And like I said, this was a big community project, and it was one of the, it was based on Boy's ideas of this idea of a social sculpture, that you can sort of mold sort of social relations. He sort of called it a sculpture. 1991, Mel Chin, American artist, he worked with agronomist from the USDA, Rufus Cheney, to remediate the Pig's Eye landfill in near St. Paul, Minnesota. So this was, I believe, the first and one of the first tests of using what are called hyperaccumulators. These are plants that take up heavy metals in their stems, and they were used to remediate the soil. So I believe, again, it might be the first confirmed, at least, use of these specific plants to do soil remediation. And sort of an interesting, so it's like a proof of concept, but an interesting sort of aspect of this is back when the NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, still gave money directly to artists. They don't do that anymore. They almost took back the grant they gave them because they said it wasn't art. So we had to argue that it was art. Okay, so that's, I guess, kind of a brief history, or sort of looking back. So most of the pieces now I'll show are a little more contemporary. One of the sort of rock stars in the field is Natalie Jeremijenko. She's a professor at NYU. So she has a multidisciplinary background in computer science, environmentalism, and she's a professor in the art department. She creates what she calls public research spectacles, and I'll show you a couple of examples. So she kind of has this artist as engineer and inventor kind of approach to things, and she works very, very collaboratively with these sort of huge teams. And most of her work is about reimagining our collective relationship to natural systems and to animals and that sort of thing. So two of her projects that I really like are amphibious architecture and ooze, which is zoo backwards. So amphibious architecture, basically it's a bunch of sensors in the water. This is in New York, in I believe the East River. So it measures water quality mostly, I think, through dissolved oxygen, and also the presence of fish. So if there's fish nearby, the sensors can detect them. And so the colors, I believe it goes from red to blue, depending on the dissolved oxygen level. And they'll, I believe, blink if there's fish nearby. But the piece is also interactive. It allows people to text message the fish. And then the fish will respond. The fish will respond by giving the people information on the sort of status of the river of the fish. So she actually did some background research, and she found out that first the fish had somewhat disturbing levels of heavy metals, and more curiously, many of them were on antidepressants because the people of New York apparently are on antidepressants. So it goes through the sewer system and eventually goes out to the river, and so again, this is a sort of treating the river with, not treating the river with a do not disturb approach. And it's not just about this sort of technical system. She created a whole kind of performance, if you like, around it. She created a nonprofit, or maybe, I don't know if it was a nonprofit or a for-profit corporation, and she actually put the fish on the board of directors. I don't know how that got approved, but she did it. And on the opening night, she had a, like sort of typical art opening. There was hors d'oeuvres and wine, but they also had the hors d'oeuvres were food that both people and the fish can eat. So you can throw it in the water and the fish will eat it, and it would chelate the fish. It would remove the heavy metals, and that really sort of, eating is kind of sort of intimate, right? You're taking things into your body, so you're sort of breaking bread with the fish, so to speak. So again, it sort of raised awareness, and a lot of her work is concerned with urban systems, or relating to living systems within urban space, and the fish are there every day, but people don't even think about it, right? And there's obviously millions of people in New York, and they walk by the East River. It's sort of just part of their daily environment, but it's sort of seen, but not, not part of consciousness. So she sort of, again, raised awareness. Another piece she did in Australia, this piece called Mussel Choir. This is a sort of gallery installation version, but she did one in off the coast of, I believe it was Sydney. So mussels are often used, as you may know, as what are called indicator species or sentinel organisms. So they take up a lot of contaminants in their tissue, I guess, whatever it's called. And so she put, again, this is definitely not the opposite of the do not disturb approach. She actually put Hall effect sensors inside the mussels. So apparently when they, the way they react to, I guess, contaminants in the water is they'll open or close their shells. And so the Hall effect sensor can sense that, and she mapped that to sound and music, and pipe that into the gallery. So people, just from sort of hearing the choir, can get a sense of the water quality off the coast. So that's, these pieces are kind of part of that sort of ooze idea. So this is a piece called Robotic Geese, where you can sort of sit on this chair and take a robotic goose and sort of interact with the real geese in the lake. Another sort of aspect of this is this sort of open structure of participation. So they can actually record the sounds that the geese make, and so she created a goose speak database. People can kind of sort of tag it to try and figure out the kind of language that the geese are talking. Okay, so I'm going to move on quickly, so I don't have time for questions. But this is in Pittsburgh. This is Tim Collins and Reiko Goto. This is a community project. Artists, scientists, all kinds of people, with a series of community dialogues and conversations over about 3 years, working at on site at the 9 Mile Run Valley. This is in Pittsburgh. It's a watershed, a sort of stream valley that was used by the steel industry for slag disposal. So this was about, again, community participation as to how are we going to clean this up, what are we going to do with this space. This is a robot that remediates the water. This is Henriques collaborating with scientists and engineers from, I don't know how you pronounce it, but Vrije University in Amsterdam. So it's a photosynthetic robot that harvests, I don't remember if it was solar or a combination of sort of microbial fuel cell technology, which I'll talk about in a minute. But as it sort of gets the energy, it also remediates the water. This piece is similar by a similar piece by Gilberto Esparza called plantas nómadas, nomadic plants. So it does the same thing. It takes water from contaminated rivers. He deployed it in his home country in Mexico. And sort of uses the plants and a sort of microbial fuel cell system and solar energy to power itself, but also to remediate, to clean the water. So microbial fuel cell is basically a dirt battery. Anaerobic bacteria, when they metabolize, they release electrons. So you can harness that. So this is another piece that does that. So they map the sort of electrical fluctuations to sound, and they projected microscope images of the bacteria. They also deployed it in a lake. This is Raza Smit and Reitis Smits, they're Latvian artists. So they made sort of pond batteries as well, using the lake itself as a sort of battery. So the cathode would be sort of in the air, and then the anode would be down in the mud. And they had workshops and all kinds of sort of public events. So I think that's enough to give you a sense, and I'll sort of leave you with a project I did in Wuhan over the spring. So this was a residency for the International Symposium of Electronic Art, which is sort of a major art and technology festival. So I proposed, so the festival was actually in Hong Kong, but the residency called for proposals to work with sort of community members in Wuhan. So Wuhan is sort of like east central China. It's about, I don't know, I want to say 800 kilometers west of Shanghai. And it's a big city. It's like 11 million people. And it's a city with a lot of water. So it's on the Yangtze, and it's a lot of water. Obviously the Yangtze is there. There's a lot of lakes. What you're looking at is sort of a contemporary map, but they've actually, over the last 50, 60 years or so, have lost about 35% of their lakes. And it's part of the identity of the city. So I worked with other artists who were there and other again people from the community to build this floating data wetland that monitors water quality. We monitored pH and dissolved oxygen and temperature, but that was mostly to calibrate the sensors. And used it, and then the colors of the LEDs change based on the water quality. So red is bad, and blue is good, and purple is somewhere in the middle. So this is just a prototype. The sort of vision is to have a kind of sort of sensor network across the city that individuals can sort of deploy in their own neighborhoods, because many people literally in their backyards have small lakes and ponds, so you can just quickly just sort of see kind of the status of your water quality in your own neighborhood. And the data was sort of put live up on the internet, and people can get it on their computers and on their mobile devices. So we did some like I said, we put the data online. So that bottom part, that's JavaScript object notation, in case you don't know. You can use that data to do visualizations. And that's sort of an example visualization. That thing coming down, that's when the piece shut down, so that all the sensor data goes to zero. And like I said, we exhibited in Hong Kong as well. So I think I'll leave it there. There is sort of more you could say regarding the theoretical frameworks that we can use to sort of analyze them using, in your reading, I think they talk about Felix Guattari and his idea that basically he's arguing we need subjectivity in science. And I agree. So I'll leave it there. And if you're sort of interested in this kind of work, I'm at, like I said, Department of Art, the Digital Experimental Media program. So actually, right now, my colleague, Matt Garcia, is teaching an art and ecology course. So we sort of do this type of stuff. Okay, so I'll leave the rest of the time for questions. Oh, and you can. Question, yes?
So in your project, you said you tested the water quality and that's what the LEDs showed?
Yeah.
What kind of tests did you run? I saw that that one said pH.
Yeah, so we basically just pH and dissolved oxygen.
Okay.
And from that, you can calculate a water quality index, and I was taking readings about every 15 minutes, doing that and sending it out. There was we're sending out over the cellular phone network, so there's like a cellular module. It's powered by solar panels. And if there's sun, it'll charge enough to last all night. Although I guess we didn't test it for a long time, so I don't know long term. Actually, long term, the thing would probably just, it's not built to engineering specs, let's say. But it was enough, for the residency and for the, yeah.
Does it operate on its own, or do you have to be operating it?
Oh no, it operates on its own as long as it's got power. Yeah. Yes.
So most of the examples you provided were examples of art to try to show remediation of environmental problems.
Yeah. I try to keep it a little bit narrow. Yeah.
Are there any people working on just trying to help communicate through art how a natural ecosystem functions? Like, say, the tall grass prairie, for example.
How it functions?
Yeah. Just basic ecological communication through the art medium.
There probably is, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. But most of these, pieces are sort of, they're kind of like entry points into, certainly, like I say, this microbial fuel cell thing. Obviously, if you're going to do workshops, you have to show people how the microbial fuel cells function, for example. So there is some education involved, but it's very sort of DIY kind of.
I asked that because I'm on the board for Friends of the Kansa Prairie, and we're all about environmental education at the Kansa. So,
yeah. The Jeremijenko's piece also, there was some aspect of that. It's not obviously what you see here, but forget the professor who was involved. He was a fish biologist of some kind. Forget. Yeah. Is there another
corresponding question?
Yeah.
Much of this seems to be happening in large urban environments. Is there much of a push to get it out to small town America or traveling?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, a lot of these, again, I'm showing you kind of the top artists in the field, and they tend to be in large urban areas. I actually recently just wrote a grant to try and do some of the stuff here in the prairie, so we're working on it.
Good.
Yeah.
To whom did that grant go?
I'm sorry?
To whom did that grant go? What was the agency that you said?
NEA, National Endowment for the Arts. We had John Briggs as a co-PI, which can only help. So we'll find out, I think, maybe in January if we got it or not. It's pretty ambitious, so I'm not, we'll see. Anyone else? Yeah?
Is that how they're usually funded through a grant?
Yeah, some of them, this guy might have been a grad student when he did it, this piece. Jeremijenko, she got a lot of money from the city and the state of New York. She's amazing at marshaling resources. Same with this. Tim Collins and Goto were at, I think they got a lot of private money for this. This is in Pittsburgh, where there's a lot of, I guess, old money, like the Heinz Foundation and all that.
So you would just have to be pretty resourceful.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what, I didn't have time to show everything, but I don't know if I have any others that I didn't show here. We had a speaker a few months ago from UC Santa Cruz that a lot of the projects there are funded in collaboration with scientists through, NSF has this broader impacts part of the grant that's about sort of community engagement or just getting it out to the general public. So they'll use some of those funds for their project. I mean, it might not seem a lot to a scientist, but $20,000-$30,000, a artist can do a lot with that. Yeah, I don't have it here, but yeah, that's some of the ways that at least with NSF funds that they fund it. Yeah.
So do you work with people from K-State to design your projects? Like yours had a lot of technology. Did you write all the code and everything yourself? And design
That one, yeah, that was all me. But yeah, I'm working on that too. Yeah, I mean, things can only get better when people from different disciplines,
Yeah.
put.
So could you apply for different grants too through like an engineering program or an environmental? Instead of just
Some artists do that, and I'm working on it too. Yeah, no, I personally know artists who have certainly co-PIs, but even been PIs on those type of grants. NSF is weird. For some grants they require you have a PhD, and not all artists have PhDs, but not for others they don't. So, and more artists are getting PhDs, but those that don't, they some of them it's like kind of like they have one. They've done a lot of work.
Carlos, has there been much effort to try to get these ideas to the art teachers in the K-12 sort of world of getting kids inspired about art and ways of doing it?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, for me, a concern if are they even going to get it? It's probably maybe the reverse. Maybe the younger kids will get it easier than the adults. I don't know. Jeremijenko has worked with kids in some of her projects. She did some kind of, I want to say, a solar chimney type project with kids. So yes, but there probably could be more.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's to me that's harder than university teaching, So it's a challenge. You need to work with educational professionals to really, I think, make it work.
Kind of continuing the line of research questions. I mean, as an artist, could you give us an example of what a research question might be that you would pose? If I look at polluted water, I can
Yeah.
think of science-based research questions. But what kind of things
Yeah.
would you be trying to answer with projects like this as an artist?
So it's kind of a mix sometimes of sort of humanities style research and technological research. So Tim Collins and Reiko Goto, their PhDs were in actually I don't remember it might have been in like an environmental sciences department in the UK. They're American, but they did their PhDs in the UK. I read a couple of their papers. I'm trying to think their specific research questions, but it's along the lines of what methodologies and strategies can be used for public engagement with environmental and ecological restoration, for example. So that would be something like. Others, like my PhD, was much more, I guess, esoteric, if you like. I was looking at developing a sort of analytical framework for analyzing interactive art experiences, art that uses like interactive art, that typically uses like artificial intelligence and machine learning. It was a more humanities style, but my methods were sort of my art projects.
So
I have a whole other presentation where I'll talk about that. I'm happy to do that too. Yeah.
So I've got another question. It's sort of weird, but it's, you've presented a number of things that are visual.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit that's auditory.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about a Minnesota undergrad that used his cello to play temperature year by year to give us an idea of global warming. And there was a little bit about taste with the fish food and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything related to feel in terms of any of these efforts?
Feel, you mean tactile?
Tactile, yeah.
Specifically for environmental, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but other new media artworks definitely do that. It'd be sometimes if you look at like conferences like Tangible Interaction Conference and the Kite, there's artists doing that type of thing. one that I can think of, I think if it's a real good one. I'm blanking on the name now. Well, I did a piece where you interact with an intelligent drum system, and it responds by sound and by electrotactile stimulation. I had a belt. So, and that actually draws from sensory substitution techniques where, let's say, blind kids, they're taught to see by sort of touch. The trunk is a very apparently good area for this stuff, or sometimes the fingers. So there's artists, experimenting with.
I think it would be really neat to take.
Yeah, I'm actually a sound guy, so I
Yeah.
a lot of times prefer to communicate that way. But also tactile, I think, is.
To take the Kansas wind to some of our eastern urban communities. And
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a grad student at Stanford who was doing that, taking winds from somewhere in the Bay Area and piping it into the gallery. It was a kinetic piece and light, so it was like motion and light. But you can do sound, you can do tactile, you can do anything. Mm-hmm.
So this is my first time even being introduced to this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any like book or movie you recommend on this kind of thing?
Yeah, there's one called, it's sort of kind of like a encyclopedic, which will show you a lot of different projects, called To Life. I forget the artist's name. It's sort of like a, and it's actually good, it's a good probably textbook for a course. She looks at, which is sort of my area of interest too, is not just environmental art, but artists of all kinds working with living systems and with, whether it's the environment or even DNA, biological art of all kinds. So it's called To Life. Like we can just
TWO or TO?
To, like, T-O, life. I'm trying to think of the author's name. So that's one, specifically sort of kind of geared to environmental art.
And it's like an encyclopedia.
It's kind of like an encyclopedia, yeah. It's just a list of a bunch of projects and a sort of brief kind of analysis of it. For general work kind of in the new media art field, there's it's sort of outdated now, but Stephen Wilson wrote a just big book on what he called information arts, which is all kinds of art, artificial intelligence, genetics, environmentalism.
What was that name?
Stephen Wilson. Mitchell Whitelaw wrote a piece on a book on art and artificial life.
Carlos, one of the forums that's out there for the people to connect with stuff is museums.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if any of the people who are in the design of new exhibits are taking any of this sort of environmental art.
Well, one of the a lot of these pieces, they exist outside of galleries and museums simply by their name. Sometimes it's called site-specific, right? But even then, they might be connected in some way with a gallery. I would say there could probably be more of that, sure, in general. I'm thinking more galleries than, usually museums, like in big cities, it's very hard to sort of get into them. I think the best, certainly if you're starting out, the best mediums are these festivals like Isaiah and Ars Electronica, places like that. And because those get a lot of visitors, and it's sort of a combination of sort of art festival and academic symposiums. I think those are the best, probably.
Other questions?
Yeah.
For these pieces, who would you say is the target audience? Like, who are you actually trying to impact? 'Cause I feel like a lot of times the individuals who would come to an art symposium or a science exhibit would be the ones who are already interested.
Sure.
So,
Well, that's true of almost
right.
everything, right? So, but certainly the community projects I showed, typically it's for, you don't want to just say, oh, it's for everybody, but it's for just because it's outdoors, anybody can just come and kind of look at it or interact with it or whatever it is. Yeah, other pieces might be more people who are interested in, who have an interest in sustainability. But again, something like sustainability or education or you know, a lot of things are, everybody says they're interested and they are interested, but there isn't maybe structures to sort of easily engage the public. So these artists are sort of experimenting with kind of alternative models of sort of citizen engagement or yeah, participation. So for a lot of those pieces, I would say it's kind of the general public, really. You know. Others, you know, other pieces in this field might be a little more sort of academic, right? So, you know, arts, again, in this area, new media it kind of straddles that line, you know. We have peer-reviewed journals that we publish in and we talk to each other, but we also show stuff that's, you know, open to the public. You know. So it kind of depends on what you're talking about, but I think a lot of these pieces are the general public, or maybe a specific community like the one in Pittsburgh that was specifically geared for the people who live there, right? But the model can be sort of expanded. You know, and the thing I did in Wuhan, it's, you know, is contextualized to Wuhan, but the model I think can be expanded to other areas. You know. Linda Weintraub. Two Life, Eco Art and the Pursuit of a Sustainable Planet, Linda Weintraub. So that's a good one because it has just a lot of artists in it.
Carlos, I mentioned laser
Yes.
earlier. Could you tell us a little bit more about laser and maybe some examples of the types of talks or presentations?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you. LASER stands for Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous. So Leonardo is kind of the premier peer-reviewed journal of people who are working at the intersection of art, science, and technology. And in around 2008 in San Francisco, they so that's the website. They started just the community there, sort of independent of it wasn't like a Leonardo initiative or anything, but they started a series of talks to basically just bring artists and scientists, engineers into the same place to talk. And then it started spreading sort of throughout California. So this is 2008 or so. And the last couple of years, it's kind of spread a little more. And when I came here, I started the first Prairie laser. And it's been going good. So let me bring it back so I can see. You can go to the website and we have we video record all our events and everything, so you can look at all our speakers. Here's one we did back in November. So we had Joel Slayton. He was actually my professor from my MFA days. And he runs, or until very recently, just retired from it. He ran an art and technology nonprofit in San Jose called 01. And he's also, like I said, at San Jose State. We had Mike Herman talking about his C. elegans work. Linda Duke, Katie Kingery-Page from landscape architecture. And we have photos and videos from this event. So we just had one last week, and we're going to put up the videos and photos soon. So yeah, Joel kind of rocked the house when he did his presentation, because he showed it was a really good mix of his own past work, which is pretty radical stuff, and the work he's been sort of curating at 01. So that's what we typically try to have maybe one guest speaker every semester, or at least one a year. Tricia?
I was just curious, has there been any work to try to demonstrate or show how engagement with this sort of ecological art by the general public then translates to, say, motivation or even action to
Yeah, so has there been any peer-reviewed studies that I think Tim Collins and Reiko Goto did, yes. I think I haven't read them, but so the short answer is yes, but probably again not a lot. You know, artists typically don't have the beyond doing an exhibition and and then getting more funds to do studies. We just did a symposium. We got some money. Carol Bloxham from horticulture, she was sort of the PI on it, but we got an academic excellence grant to do a one-day symposium over at Kanza over the summer. We did this isn't really super scientific, but we did do, you know, sort of questionnaires and everything to see how people feel, essentially. But not a lot. Like I said, I know Tim Gollins and Reiko Goto did some of that. It's very hard. I think, you know, the methodologies would be interesting because really I think you're not going to know short-term anything, really. You have to do it long-term. And it's a change in consciousness, right? How do you measure that? You know? I mean, maybe you can take some interesting measures, like you have to follow the people around, look at the communities they lived in, and is there some correlation to the environmental health? And you can even correlate that to any art project, you know? So I think it's a consciousness thing in the long term. It's an interesting research problem, I guess.
Any last questions? Okay. Well, let's thank Dr. Castellanos one more time, please.
Thank you.